All right. We are live right now. Charlie's signing on. Had a little bit of hookups with Facebook once again, but we are live. Charlie, are you there?
I am. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. I hope you guys are enjoying the Friday today. It's a good day. It's nice weather here in Humboldt County. We have a pretty awesome group of people here today with us. One special person in particular, my dad. So I'm really excited for you all to get to know him from a virtual level. And as with anyone who lives upriver where we're from, Wi-Fi and cell phone service is pretty hard to come by. So bear with us, but he will be here. I think he might be in attendance. And Dad, are you there? Just to check real quick. Virgil, do you think you could click on the participants and see if you could upgrade them to at least allow him to talk? Maybe might be have to change in a setting.
Okay.
It's the 530 number. It says he's an attendee. And then if you click the more option, I think it should promote him to something. There we go. You there, Pop?
Am I here?
Yep.
Yes.
Alrighty.
Made it.
Alrighty. So I'll get back.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So like I had mentioned, we have a very special guest, and we also have Dr. Beth Rose Middleton from UC Davis, and they have my father and her have a pretty good relationship with their work at UC Davis and other fellow graduate students. So I think we're going to have a pretty good discussion kind of with that balance of academia and local indigenous knowledge. And obviously we're going to do a really good job kind of honing that into what we do at Two Feathers as an organization and with the community members that we serve. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Beth Rose to introduce herself, and then we'll break into other introductions of the rest of us here today. So I hope you all are having a good Friday, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I have a great respect for this organization, for Two Feathers, and just honored to be invited to participate and to be here with Ron Reed and Charlie Reed and Virgil Morehead. My name is Beth Rose. I'm a faculty member and the current chair of Native American Studies at UC Davis. I'm repping my shirt for our 50th anniversary, designed by Desiree Langley. I'm Afro-Caribbean and Eastern European. I was born and raised in Miwok country in the Central Sierra near the McCollum River. And I hold a degree, PhD in environmental science and policy. And really the best parts of my work are collaborating with tribes on land issues, whether that's land restoration or land return, and also mentoring amazing students in the Department of Native American Studies at UC Davis. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm Virgil Morehead. I'm the Behavioral Health Director here at Two Feathers and the co-host with Charlie Reed for today's speaker series. I'm really excited to have both Beth and Ron on here. I think it's an exciting and really interesting topic. And so how we're going to do it today is, Beth, you will show some slides, a little presentation on some of your work, and then we'll bring in Ron into the conversation and have a dialogue for the rest of the time. And then audience members out there in the Facebook world, if you have any questions, just type them in the comment section, and we'll take them and ask the speakers today. So if you just share your screen, and I allowed you to share, so hopefully it works.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. I just have a few slides here. I probably will not go through all of them because I really want us to be able to talk, but I'll show a few. So this is just thoughts on land rights and wellness, and I thought I'd just talk a little bit about where I focus my work, and then we can have a conversation about it and and relate it more broadly to wellness. When I thought of the topic, I thought of where, I feel really well and what feels really good to be doing. And this is last weekend with family and friends up on the Maidu Summit land in the northeastern Sierra, Tasman-Koyam or Humbug Valley, which is the first major return or transfer of land to Maidu people since contact. It's a very culturally important high mountain valley. And so been blessed to be able to help with some of the work out there, doing some cleanup and then planting native plants. So to put this in context, of course, I think about the fact that we are all within indigenous homelands, but we live in this context of colonial legacies, of land takings, of denial of relationship to land, and continued denial of indigenous rights and relationship to take care of lands. And in taking care of lands, it's taking care of communities as well. So I think about that as, someone who is not from here, even though I grew up here, how am I part of that and how can I work to address it? So I think about decolonization and what it means to really decolonize has to always involve repatriation of land and recognizing different relationships to land and honoring indigenous knowledge. So the areas I work on from an environmental policy perspective are how do we accomplish that? Is it through land transfers? Is it through co-management mechanisms, pushing for legislation that transfers land, raising money to buy land, setting up land trusts, native land trusts, cultural conservation easements, maybe even using carbon offsets as a mechanism for returning land, changes to tax law that make it hard for people to hang on to their homelands, and then looking at species protection as another way to protect land and return it to indigenous people. So those are some of the things I work on. Thought I'd give an example building on just that image I showed from Tasman-Koyam. I think one of the reasons to me it's so special to be able to be out there is just having witnessed and been part of like the last almost 20 years of the struggle to get this land back into Maidu hands. And of course, a much longer history for people who are from there, that before the dams were put in on the North Fork Feather, salmon did come all the way up into this valley. They don't anymore at this time, maybe one day with hopefully eventually there might be some dam removal. But there are a lot of native species, there are different plants, culturally important plants. It's still a very important valley, and it's one of the few that was not flooded for hydro development. So in the research for my last book for Upstream, which I should say too, the book was really just a small part of the work, which was more involved in creating this map that resides in the communities and which I hope can be used for advocating for land return. But I looked at the history of the development of the State Water Project and just really trying to bear witness to this colonial history that we are still embroiled in. Like when we turn on the tap, we're getting water in all these downstream areas from the State Water Project and the Federal Water Project, which seized tribal land and never provided restitution for that. So I did map allotments just to show a snapshot of land that the federal government had affirmed was Maidu land, but then quickly canceled, gave to the power company, as this record shows where it's crossed off, and then put in a series of dams. This is downstream at Oroville, the largest earthen fill dam. This is my son several years ago watching the salmon not be able to get upstream down at Oroville. I was just struck by private companies benefiting off of this infrastructure, which completely denied tribal land rights. And I really wanted to do something about it. So I looked at these histories of lands, how they were taken, the building of the dams, the flooding of Lake Almanor, Big Meadows, and then, this opportunity to get lands back, even with some restrictions through the Stewardship Council and through Pacific Gas and Electric's process of having to divest lands it wasn't directly using for hydropower. And as people from the Maidu Summit can tell you, who came to many of these meetings all the time, Lorena Gorbett, Beverly Ogle, Vance Hedrick, many others, Ben Cunningham in this photo, and came to these meetings over and over and said, this is our land. Why are we not part of this process? And it was finally successful. and this land is transferred now to the Maidu Summit. So that really makes my heart feel good. And this is the board chairman, Ben Cunningham, working on burning some piles and cleaning up the land. And for me, it's been a learning process, and one I share with my students through our different courses, like California Indian Environmental Policy. I have another course I've created with graduate students called Keepers of the Flame, that's about the importance of traditional burning. And a lot of it is thinking about land ethic, relationship to land. Caring for the land is not, one time an agency comes out and does a burn and then leaves. It's like all the time. It's a relative. It's like your garden, your home. So I've been learning about that and thinking about how in my work I can promote making space for the wellness that comes from being able to carry out that responsibility and care for homelands. So my first book was about land trusts, and they're just one of many tools that could be used. And there are a lot of native land trusts that have now formed. These are some examples. These are mostly in California, except the one up north, which EAC Preservation Council is actually a sister organization of the Native Land Conservancy led by June Lankard. And then the rest are all in California. Mamutsun, Kumeyaay Degeno Land Conservancy, all doing really powerful work, getting native homelands back and taking care of them and getting people out on the land. Great respect for the work Sogorea-Te Land Trust is doing in the Bay Area, even in an urban context. So this is really a growing movement, just using this tool of the land trust and the easement. Another tool for me has been looking at the importance of co-management agreements with agencies, with private landowners, in order to enable traditional stewardship and eventually, ideally, land transfers, not just co-management. This was a real special experience, being able to work with Ron Good on his family land down by Mariposa, bringing my class out there 2 times, and really a 3rd time that our grad students went out with the class in the last few years to participate in a burn. Students, native and non-native, learning about the importance of burning as a traditional land management strategy, especially in context of climate change and reduced water. And we took care of, Ron showed us how to take care of some different basketry plants, and then coming back a few years later with these weavers, Dunlop Mono weavers and their families, was really powerful just to be part of that process. So some of the challenges in trying to use these tools for returning land are really getting people to face the ongoing racism and settler colonial violence that are embedded in our most accepted institutions, those that deliver water and power, for example. And then figuring out policy-wise the financial incentives. Not everybody can afford, some people can afford to deed their land over, or, but not everybody can. So what are the financial tools available that incentivize land transfers and co-management and land restitution? And then finally, dealing with contamination. What if when land is transferred, it's contaminated? How do you deal with the cleanup? Who are the partners you work with? That's been some of the kind of focus of my work with the Superfund collaboration, looking at the Klamath, working with Yurok Tribe Environmental Program, not necessarily about a land transfer, but it's about what's in the river and how can people monitor it themselves, when they're out in the water. So these are just some of the creative tools, innovative cleanup technologies. What if there's legally required mitigation that might include land transfer and land protection? When a developer or a company is going to do something with land, they need to mitigate that impact. There might be opportunities for land transfers to tribes or native nonprofits. Carbon offsets, when they affirm Indigenous land rights and provide funding to restore those land rights, those can be a tool, and other conservation partnerships. So a way forward, these are Indigenous lands. Decolonization is necessary and it's complicated. And, as an ally and as someone who teaches both Native and non-Native students, I think about, what are the best ways to be an ally, and a lot of that is listening and hearing what is needed and not needed. But I have found some hope in working on developing these tools for land transfer. So that's all I have there.
That was really impressive. I liked how fluid that was. I think that was really impressive for me as a student to just see how it almost seemed like you might have rehearsed it, but I know that that was kind of a last minute thing. And so I think that's really impressive. And so one of the things that I've kind of noticed, like it was kind of a theme of that presentation, was just kind of the relationship that Indigenous people have with land and how denied access to manage those lands, to harvest the resources from those lands is to the people. And so I was just wondering, from your research or from your experiences, how what are the social implications of denied access to those traditional foods and management practices?
Sure. I think, sorry, I thought my son was going to run in here, so I got a little distracted. So not being able to get foods, not being able to get medicines, I think just the criminalization of going out within your homelands to gather or to take care of areas so that you can gather where your relatives have gone before and gathered and cared for those places, but suddenly you can't go there. There's a fence, or the ownership changed, or there's some new policy that the agency is following that means you can't do this. I think it's really problematic on so many levels, not just the physical level of not being able to gather, but the I want to say like epistemological, the way of knowing, like your way or Indigenous ways of knowing are suddenly denied in that moment. Like, this doesn't make sense on this landscape. There's somebody else saying that there's a better way to manage the land, and that's just so problematic. And also, it really hasn't worked. I think the evidence is super clear that fire suppression, that annihilating different species because they were, not financially viable. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. So I see a lot of people turning and wanting to know more about Indigenous knowledge. In some ways, I find that problematic too. Like, to me, it's not about, coming in and getting that information. It's about respecting that people have been holding this knowledge, trying to enact it over time, maintaining it, and then they need to have the space to do that. So I hope that answered,
Yeah, that was a really great answer. And I think a lot of times, especially in this academic institutional world, it's like, oh, well, we're now open to hearing those those new perspectives, or now that there's like kind of a coin of traditional ecological knowledge in academia, it's like, well, yeah, I'm working with a couple tribes, it's like, well, are you uplifting them or are you speaking for them? Because like there's a reciprocity associated with that. Like, the native peoples, especially from my dad and myself's experience, it's like, well, our people need to have that sense of responsibility, sense of belonging. And, so there's a social need. There's like a void in our communities. So I just wanted to bring my dad in at this point and kind of see what he has to say about the social implications of denied access to harvesting traditional foods. And before we dive into that question, you could go ahead and introduce yourself, since we kind of skipped over you real quick.
Okay, hey, thanks, Charlie. My name is Ron Reed. I'm a cultural person. I'm a ceremonialist. I'm a world renewal ceremonialist. I'm a key participant at the Pikiawish at Inam. And all the things we've been talking today is the life that we live. And it's very amazing to hear this story being academically in an academic context. And I've been doing this work for practically all my life, and so I really appreciate Beth Rose and her perspective and her diligence and her work that she is so prominent. And I was just taken aback by the work that she does. But one thing that you was talking about is denied access to traditional foods. And I just like to introduce myself by being a cultural biologist for the Kaduk tribe for 20 years. And I basically started my career working on the Klamath River Hydroelectric Relicensing Project, and what turns out to be dam removal. So that's amazing. And at the time, traditional knowledge was basically anecdotal information. And until farmers in the Upper Basin wanted to use their place-based knowledge as leverage points of management. So he jumped on our bandwagon a little bit, and we was able to really use that energy of place-based management techniques and using the world renewal management umbrella, because world renewal is a place-based religion, and it's a place-based community, and so therefore it's all interconnected. And the world that we lived in took care of us, and it's by way of ceremony. And so basically we was able to rely on traditions and cultural beneficial uses that were passed down for thousands of years. And when that became against the law, it literally turned Kadu people, the indigenous science, it was unlawful to manage that way. So in that aspect, forced assimilation came in and created atrocities throughout Indian country. And so we're still scrambling today to find our place. And we're not able to do it without management of our resources, the harvest, and the wellness that is associated with every aspect of our life. So I guess that was just a comment I wanted to make, and I'll just turn it right back over.
Yeah, that was really good. I appreciate that, just kind of how eloquently you segued in from, your introduction right on into kind of the answer of the question. I think that just kind of speaks to how interconnected identity is to management and harvesting. And so I think that's something that is really worth recognizing and highlighting. And that's what's pretty awesome about, how passionate I am with our work here out at Two Feathers, is just how much there's a holistic approach to mental health, because we know that there's that symbiotic relationship between people and Mother Earth. And so how do we use this kind of Western framework construct to kind of meet the needs, the mental health needs of our community? And that's what we kind of are trying to encapsulate at Two Feathers, is just kind of engulfing or incorporating indigenous ways of knowing, which is language, cultural activities, and the different creation stories and different teachings to our youth that have been kind of taken from us. And so I don't know if Virgil wanted to kind of construe this conversation into that kind of framework.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Ron and Beth. I had a question for maybe both of you, and maybe we'll start with Beth. I know you include some of your work, Beth, is trauma. And, trauma, just the word or the concept, is very much in line with a lot of the work that we're doing here at Two Feathers. And so, how did you come to incorporate a concept like trauma into the research and the work that you do? And how kind of like what Charlie is saying, how do you see it as interconnected? And in so being interconnected, how does that, as you see it, maybe help the development of our communities as Indigenous people?
Thank you. Yeah, trauma is a heavy concept, but it's one I felt like I had to engage with, and in part because, the history is not long removed of some of the horrible things that happened here in California in particular, and the institutions are formed from that. So I've been thinking about trauma, kind of start big and then ground it a little bit in teaching I'm teaching federal Indian law right now. And these decisions are so horrible and so racist from the 19th century, but they still get cited in the 20th century. They're set as precedent and nobody has overturned them. So I was thinking about that with land. I kind of showed you some of those pictures of PG&E. There's so much, or Great Western Power, the power company taking tribal lands. There's so much that's not, in those slides that are in the letters people were writing back and forth to try to hang on to their homelands, that reflect some of the things that were happening in their families at that time. And the impacts of that carry on into the present. Not being from that community, I can't speak about it the way someone is who is a descendant. So often I will ask someone from the Mighty Summit to co-present with me if I'm talking about that history there. But I think for me, it's just acknowledging how recent trauma on the land and the people was, and how it still carries forward in the institutions that try to exclude people from being within their homelands, or don't recognize that these are indigenous lands. And just as an example, when I was working on the project about the history of the state water project and the power company lands, I would hear people say, oh, that's always been the power company land. So it was really widespread. Like, even that lack of recognition of the history, I think, contributes to the trauma. People, like the public, doesn't understand the impact, the ongoing impact of this history. And so I feel like, having these conversations where we bring this information out, and then people from all backgrounds like have to deal with it and think about their role in it. To me, it helps try to unpack even that layer of not recognizing that there is trauma, and then figuring out, where do we go from here? Like, we give land back, we do something different. We don't keep going with the way things are, which ignores the trauma that's there under the surface.
Thank you for that. As you were talking, I was reminded of our speaker yesterday, Sandy Gran, and one of the things that she mentioned was the word disconnect. So, like, the impact of trauma is often manifested in disconnection from the land, disconnection from yourselves, disconnect from your teachings. And so and I think that's one of the reasons for us doing this speaker series is, how do we show our community that this is all connected, that environmental justice is just as important as mental health justice, and decolonizing mental health is just as important as decolonizing climate change from like an indigenous perspective. So thank you for that. And so maybe turn it over to Ron to answer the question, which is the original question, which is around trauma and how you see, the interconnection of trauma and some of the things that you've done as, as the past sort of cultural biologist for the Crook tribe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Virgil, and thank you, Rose. I mean, the work you do just kind of resounds in my, not only in the work that I've done, but in my emotions and my whole integrity of my culture, so it's very wonderful to be talking about this right now. But, of course, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, that's really associated with forced assimilation. Unfortunately, I am a descendant of that. I feel like I am a product of that. I feel robbed. I feel robbed of a identity, a sense of purpose, a sense of being connected with something. My whole life, I just wanted to be connected to something, and that didn't happen because the first day of public school, I got in trouble. And from that point on, it was an upward pull, and the only thing I can really say is that the intergenerational teachings, the historic teachings of my people were stronger than the historic intergenerational or the what's happening nowadays, because that is what I go down to when I hit my bottom. I hit who I am as a person, what the spirit, the cultural integrity of the people who walk before me, and what I'm trying to connect into the future fits all squarely under the world renewal umbrella. And so, being a product of forced assimilation has really kind of made me feel angry, frustrated growing up. But one thing I was told at a very young age, because my first memories were participating in world renewal ceremonies with my grandpa at Inam, and hunting for deer while we're picking acorns and mushrooms at our family spot. And those are the things that kind of ground me to the spirit of the river, to the spirit of the great creator that made all things. And those are the things that frustrated me so much, because my mother, I come from a very strong family. Maggie Ike married Mike Charlie on one side, and on the other side, Dora Jerry married Shan Davis. World Renewal priest on one side and Indian doctor on the other. So there was a very strong sense of cultural integrity when I was growing up. It was greatly contrasted with the life that I was living as a young person going to public school. The integrity, the cultural integrity that I was taught carries on today. But that cultural integrity evolved about place-based religion, place-based management, and a place-based community. And those are the things I grew up in, with in stark contrast with living in conservative Siskiyou County. Native Americans were beat down to a bloody pulp. And the things that was taught at that age is coming back vividly now. And the things that I've tried to accomplish over time is basically connecting all the different things we're talking about today, management of those resources. Because one of the biggest fallacies of modern management is thinking that it's just kind of like there's no reciprocation involved. You can go out and harvest and harvest and harvest and come back and build your bank account by bottom line management, profiteering, and yet you're depleting your resource. We understand that you have to go out and manage before you develop a right to be able to utilize that resource and to be able to teach other people how you do that. And so you have a sense of providership, a sense of importance, a sense of community, that you're connected. When you fall down, other people are there to pick you back up, because that's your tribal community, and that's often family. Those are the things that I have pushed on to the next generation in respect to the generation that I come from. And those are the things that academia provides for traditional knowledge now, is validation. Me being validated that I was angry and mad and in trouble, self-medicated, all these things because of now what is called adverse childhood experiences. That's a validation for me. And so therefore, it's just kind of like it makes me work harder. It gives me inspiration. This wellness thing that I grew up with. I grew up with all the things they're talking about now in these presentations. And yet, I'm sitting here right now trying to do what is best for my family. So what I've learned over time, all the different trials and errors, trauma has handed me on a silver plate. I've been able to use the other side of the coin or the other side of the basket, because we were taught as indigenous people that luck comes in two ways, bad and good. Even if you have a sense of bad luck, there's a good luck underneath there if you take care of what you're supposed to be doing. You make your own luck. Those are things we pray for. We pray for miracles. We pray that these things that are happening in this world, we pray for them because we're fix the world people. Pikiawish in translation is fix it, fix the world. So if there's something wrong in your family, you need to fix it. If there's something wrong in society, you need to fix it. Those are the things that we can use. Indigenous science, we can kind of come back and using that connection of fire ecology to battle fire suppression. We can come back and use tribal perspective to come back and get back into the wellness, being healthy and well again. That's one of the things I've been able to do over my lifetime, is to understand these things through the work I've done through academia. Knowledge is power, and I've been able to do that, been able to transcend that through me. I was supposed to be doing what Charlie's doing, but I wasn't available to it. So those are the things that I've been treating my family, my community, and my religion, all the things that I was taught before I was corrupted by this patriarchal society, the things that are important in life. I'm a dreamer, and I want anybody out there listening, you need to be a dreamer, and you got to keep on dreaming until you find your dream. Once you find your dream, then you need to set your goals to reach your dream. Because if there's anybody that left this world that you love and has inspired you, that is what's going to inspire them. So those are the things that I've learned. These are the things that I've lived, and these are the things that I want to project into the future. And thank you.
Thank you, Ron. That was very powerful and moving. I appreciate that. In these times, I think we need to look at and listen to the words that you just are clearly and powerfully articulated. And I think some of the work that Beth does too, and is talking about, there's a lot of correlations. And so I'm going to say one thing that quoting you, Beth, and maybe you can unpack, but I think it's a lot of similar to what Ron just said. But you said our country would look different if stewarded from a different way of knowing. And so during these times, what if you can unpack that a little bit of like what from your research and your really on the ground work in many indigenous communities, I'm sure it's much of what Ron just said, but just what are your thoughts about if our country would look different, it would be stewarded in a different way?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just really still moved by what Ron was saying, so I'm reflecting on that. I think, what I was thinking there is, based on just what I see and research both into the water project history, but also history more broadly, even history of my own family. And just thinking about how decisions have been made by those in power to make decisions. And it's been driven by profit and by lack of attention to other beings, and even separating humans into different categories, some as, having more value than others. So I kept asking myself, what would California, for example, look like without development going the way that it did, without the decisions being made to move water in ways that really benefited certain large corporations, growers in the Southern Valley, and the development of cities. I was talking yesterday with Harry Williams, Kathy Bancroft, and Terry Redow from Owens Valley, and we were thinking about the history of Owens Valley and the movement of water, the taking of water from there to Los Angeles. And again, in just all these instances, I think about, what if decisions were driven not by profit, but more by, the value of different beings working together in an ecosystem, the value of human beings and different ways of knowing and taking care of place, that things would look really different. And I guess that's what I want to think about. How would they look? And then how do we, try to reform the systems we have so we get closer to that?
Thank you. And a follow-up to you, or maybe a slight pivot is, it's based on what we've already been talking about. I'm wondering, in these times too, and maybe Ron could start, is what are, as you see it, the pressing issues in our community? I know, Beth, you've worked with the Yurok tribe, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that work. But Ron, what are you seeing are the pressing issues around rural, environmental issues, land-based issues in today's day and age, or even currently with this pandemic?
Right. Thank you, Virgil. I think that what I see, if I'm asked kind of like what would I like to see happen with the community that we live in today, first of all, I think the theme or the motto I follow is basically, we're mimicking the old ways. Everything we do today is, for me personally, is going back and kind of doing a filter check on all the things that I've ever learned, and with the knowledge I have now, I try to kind of like, okay, what's the level of importance what is the cultural integrity of the management process in the worldview that would help us today? And that allows me to function or think more properly. In the dam relicensing, it was basically about identifying cultural resources as management objectives because of the patriarchal society today where it was not a profit plan or not a proper process, and it often goes underweighted in these models that allow management to occur. So it's basically these models are what you put into a model, computer in, computer out. And there's leaving everything out about our cultural resources. So with the denied access report that Corey Norgard put out, I think in 2003, I was a key informant there, but we identified these things that have never been identified before. So those are the things that has promoted this level of thinking that stretches into the future. So using indigenous science, not traditional knowledge, but indigenous science to get that validated. And I think being a I helped some people from Berkeley do a Kaduk UC Berkeley Collaborative, co-founder, there you go, I'm sorry. I'm a co-founder of the Kaduk UC Berkeley Collaborative. And their mission, basically the mission of that collaborative really is to quantify cultural resource management. In doing that, a lot of validation comes to the forefront. Fire ecology, all the different things now that are happening. We're doing great things in prescribed fire. There's a pilot project up here in our country involving traditional knowledge. So those are some big things that I think I've been at the forefront of talking about fire back in the day when nobody else was. But now the validation that comes along with knowledge allows for people that ordinarily wouldn't be participants in the society today become leadership, valuable leadership. And I think that's what I have been able to do over time, is to use the things that I was taught and didn't know I had, but also the things about respecting your elders and the things about resource management, all these different things come to a forefront. In saying that, I believe it would be tremendously important for the sovereign nations of this river system to get together again. This is one place on Klamath River when we was doing all these meetings for 20 years. This is one of the few places in the world that can be fixed from the bottom, from the mouth of the river, all the way to the headwaters up to Crater Lake. And in order to do that, all the sovereign nations, right alongside the federal government, not led by the federal government, but the due diligence and the work in academia and stuff like that, to cooperatively work together to reach the goals that society needs today. Climate change is one of those issues, and now we have, this pandemic. It just tells me that I've been into my house. I kind of shut her down a while back now, and now everybody's in their house doing these same things. Fortunately, I'm here living at the center of the world here at Cutty-Mean. I'm able to do cultural things that allow me to get stronger. The spirit of my family is actually getting stronger since I've been down for the last few years, rather than just the opposite. I shouldn't be here doing these things, but the belief system you have in world renewal is amazing. It's an interconnected commitment that is driven by sacrifice, by your heart, and by your belief of what you need to do while you're here on earth. Those are the things that the work that I've done is able not only to help the landscape, the fish, our relatives, but it's also given me a unique perspective and a unique inspirational drive to provide for my children the things that I wasn't provided with, but then also to give them the whereabouts of who they are, where they're at, and the future is all of ours. So thank you for the long-winded time.
Thank you, Ron. And follow up to Beth, I think, well said, by the way, Ron. The original question is really tying it to what's going on today with the pandemic and some of the pressing issues as you see it, and then also tying it more into local issues. And I think you're somewhat familiar with our area, so if you could maybe elaborate on both of those.
Sure, I'll try. I was thinking when you asked the question about water quality and quantity, so just the struggle to have the water that needs to be flowing in the Trinity and the Klamath, I think is significant, um, and the importance of so I'm distracted by my son here. I'm at home, but the importance of clean water, especially in this pandemic, where that's necessary. That's what we have to have at all times as well. I was thinking too of like beneficial uses, that recognition of, all the different ways that water is important, that water is essential for life, that water is used, because as Ron was mentioning the models, some of the factors that feed into decision making, they don't necessarily include indigenous ways of knowing or of valuing the water and different aspects of the landscape. So changing that in the models is significant. And in the work I've been able to do for the last couple of years with Europe Tribe Environmental Program and the Superfund project at UC Davis, it's about looking at, what are possible contaminants in the river, trying to identify those that are impacting human health and causing some of the health issues people are having. And I think that one of the challenges has been like bridging between community needs and the university perspectives, which I think the university perspective is a little bit more about, how do we determine what's there and then innovate ways to treat it, but it doesn't necessarily immediately transfer into things that community can use right away, which is like the need at the moment is figuring out, how do I know when I go into the river that it's not contaminated at that time? Or what do I do if it is? How do I treat it right there? So those are, I'm trying to work on bridging that gap between the university and community perspectives. I think too, there's a lot of leadership up north. I mean, the dam removal is so inspirational to people everywhere, and thinking about all the work that went into that and all the coalition building, all the prayers, all the time. I think that's something people look to and hope to replicate elsewhere. And getting the subsistence and cultural water quality beneficial uses categories adopted there. It's the only region of the state where those categories are recognized. I think that's significant. So I see a lot of leadership coming from up in your region.
Thank you. I'm going to turn over to Charlie, see if he has any questions or comments. And, I see we have a little bit of time left. So, yeah, Charlie.
Yeah. So I just really appreciate everyone's kind of contributions and engagement with this topic. I think in these times, it's really important to kind of recognize this kind of pattern and kind of step out of that pattern and really put like something that was Sandy Grande said yesterday is like, pray with your feet. It's like going beyond just like believing and being optimistic, but like putting in that work, putting in the groundwork to make that actually a reality. And I think that's something that's really kind of uplifting in these trying times, is just seeing how many people are coming up and showing up and being consistent, even when we're all experiencing a global pandemic. And I just wanted to recognize that and kind of ask my dad a follow up as far as like, more specifics on kind of how things have been impacted back home. I know it's really hard because we're really community oriented people who really like to be physical and engaging. And in these times, it's kind of challenging because we're, it's kind of like, you got to be selfless in that I love you. You got to be extra communicative. So I just wanted to see how the community up there is doing, Dad, in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's just because we're such a tight-knit community, it's tough. It's tough, but at the same time, I think we're all kind of like, we live in that environment anyway. We're up here. We don't have a lot of people that we interact with anyway, so it's just a little minor adjustment there, but the whole outside world, there's a sense of calm up here. In my house right now, it's a sense of calm because I can go out and invest my time into my garden, into my family. You know, I have a small garden out here, therapeutic garden, but this year I'm trying to create more of a community garden, which is community as family. So if I can create a bigger garden to feed more of my family, then that brings us together. So there's always, like I said before, there's always two sides of the coin, you know, that you have to kind of like really, you know, it's very hard sometimes to pick that coin up and look and see what's on the other side, because a lot of times there's nothing, but you have to figure out, you know, you have to invent things. And that's what we're doing right now, but it's reinventing things. That's the biggest advantage we have as an indigenous culture. We can go back and mimic, we can reinvent, revitalize the things that keep us healthy, that kept life prominent, the cultural integrity that the landscape has provided for all the things that depended on the resources, on that energy, is encompassed in the world renewal. And if we can kind of just connect everything back to world renewal. And right now, I think one of the biggest problems we have is that we manage the landscape here and now. But bartering needs to be refocused, because there's a lot of non-profitable management techniques that have been replaced by fir trees, by other different management techniques that disallow for the natural integrity of the landscape that provided over 1 million adult spawning fish returning, to be able to have a landscape that provides every need that a human being would need. So those are the things that we're able to kind of like maybe sit back for a minute, because right now we have time, and this is a time right now that indigenous societies, place-based communities need to figure out what is it that we need. And then we need to develop the narrative. And when we not only need to develop that narrative, we need to implement. And then once we implement it, then we provide oversight. Those are the things that I've ingrained in my children, why they're going to school, to connect this worldview to modern society that allows us to flourish as a people, not to just be at the bottom part of the economic scale or the health scale, whatever scale you have, we're at the bottom. But that time needs to be behind us. And if we can create a cultural integrity movement, it's called a red revolution. We need to take back what is ours. They'll never give it back to us. I don't have a fishing right up here in country, and if I'll go to my grave not having that fishing right if I don't sit out there and put something out there to be able to accomplish these goals. So it would not only help out my family, the tribal community, but then with that fishing right, then there would be the integrity of management in the modern world that we would be bestowed upon to be able to be a part of the connected nature that society is today. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, I just want to recognize also that, just how you kind of talking about, you kind of have a nice balance to your narrative just in this conversation about, just kind of like how impactful it is in a tight-knit community, but also how much of an opportunity there is even in the most dormant times. And I think that's pretty evident. And what you've done for me personally, outside of this professional realm, that's something that kind of got me to this position. And it's a full circle, and I think that's pretty recognizable just in this conversation. So I definitely thank you for being able to be resilient and having, the drive to figure out this technical side of things, because that's very much a part of it too. And it just shows you how little things do matter. And I think that your work and your inspiration is recognized by all. And so thank you, Dad. And I think Virgil had a pretty good way of tying this up.
Yeah, so I like the word revolution, Ron. And, just tying it back over as, maybe as a way to summarize some of the issues and ideas that we've already talked about, as well as maybe to provide some hope and really to show people the importance of taking care of the land. Beth, I know your research in a large part is about, new evolving tools for protecting the land. And you've written about and have great partnerships and developed great partnerships with tribal entities and other non-indigenous entities. And so the that research that you've been doing, your research that that is widely appreciated, I think. What are some of those new ways of protecting the land in this time? And we've already talked a lot about it, but just as a way to summarize and to leave the audience with some things to think about.
Thank you. Well, one thing I might mention is that, I showed that picture at the beginning of just being out there planting. I mean, that's something we can still do now. Social distancing doesn't mean we can't be out doing restoration work, caring for the land. We can be outside participating in that together. But in terms of the tools, I remember being at a conference once and asking someone very specifically, like, well, what about land trust? I think it might have been Winona LaDuke, actually. And she basically said to me, like, well, whatever's available, we'll use that tool. And so that's kind of what it's about, looking at what's out there that's possible. It's really constantly evolving, kind of trying to be creative. Land trusts are one tool, but they're not appropriate for everyone. They work really well for, in particular, I think, non-federally recognized tribes as a mechanism for acquiring land, but they can be used in all different cases, all scenarios. It depends too on what the context is. Do you have a landowner who's willing to transfer land, or are you working with someone who wants some conservation assurance, some promise that it's not going to be used in a particular way? Then you might have to use different tools to engage with that person. So I think it's just a matter of building partnerships with people who have different knowledge bases. So I have learned that through being at the university, that, for example, in my class yesterday, we have folks who are engineers, who are historians, who are artists, who are writers, and everybody is engaged in a different sphere. Then they might have a creative solution they can bring to the table. So I had a few listed in my slides, easements, land trusts, carbon offsets, beneficial uses, treatment as a state. There's lots of different possibilities, but I think it really requires being attentive to the situation, to the context. COVID is part of that context right now for us. What are ways we build on the crisis how do we deal with the crisis that we're currently in, but maintain this focus on, some of what Ron was saying, the centering of family and community and land and places being part of that community. So I would just end with just being open to all different types of tools and then building the partnerships to make them result in something real. Then that land restoration, land return, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicely said. And so turn it over to Ron. If you had any final words or anything like, Beth had just done to summarize some of the points you wanted to get across today in these times. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Virgil and Charlie and Beth Rose. It's been amazing. It's kind of like, inspiration is kind of like adrenaline. I used to be an athlete once back, and adrenaline, if you can't find adrenaline, you're going to be an average ball player. So it's about inspiration. It's driven by adrenaline. And I feel that's what's kind of like, that's how I feel right now, just because the way I feel is being validated by Beth Rose's presentation. There's, and I think that's the beauty of who I am, is that I have worked in this world long enough to know what can get me into trouble. I'm learning right now how to get out of it. So that's kind of like very important for one. I guess what I like to kind of like, one of the biggest things I'm concentrating on right now is wellness, obviously, and this is something that I was able to have visions for in the past. And in 2009, we had a youth group disadvantaged youth group go up in the Marble Mountain Wilderness area. And unfortunately, Charlie was on an all-star baseball team, so he was unable to go up there with us. But we was up there for 2 weeks, and we took some high-risk kids up there, and a lot of the supervisors and stuff like that kind of come back and said, whatever you're doing up there, you need to do more of it. And at that point in my life, that was a goal I wanted to do every year from 2009 until I passed it, or until I couldn't go up there anymore. That's the first and last time I ever did it. But it was so important to the cultural integrity of the kids at that time. And right now, it's based on the 4-season camp, and that's how I took them up there before. And again, my UC Berkeley, the Cuddick Tribe UC Berkeley Collaborative was very prominent in that, writing me a grant and getting us up there. And it's a 4-season camp. We've been doing that in our food sovereignty grant. And being providers, if you live in a village, somebody in your village had to be a provider, if not everybody. So being a provider is very important to your mental health. And so when there's no fish in the river, there's no acorns are all buggy, if there's all these different things, and when you take, I remember during the fish kill, I remember that we was taking fish, to our people, but it wasn't good fish, the appearance wasn't good at all, and the people were just, the elders were kind of taken aback, and, you're not taking care of your fish right, the world's going to go bad, but then the world has already went bad, so I guess, where I'm at is that anything we can do to revitalize our culture and to get our youth empowered by knowledge and be empowered by the thing that allowed my children to kind of express themselves to the level of academia they are right now. And those are the things that this world renewal based, landscape based, community based, all these different things, I think we have a great future. But the things that I've done in my lifetime, I'm trying to look back and reflect on the most important things and how do we get that out to the next community. Because I'm not supposed to be here. Charlie's not supposed to be there doing what he's doing. But we changed the way we're going about our business under that belief system, that faith. I was finally connected to something that I could believe in and love more than myself. And I believe that that's what this community needs. That's what this world needs. We need to worry about each other. We got to make sure that our neighbors are okay. And if the neighbors aren't okay, at some point you're not going to be okay. So that's really what I want to leave people with, the level of inspiration that no matter who you are, no matter what you do, there's a way out of this mess. And I think places like Two Feathers is that place. That's the brainchild of what we need to do in the future. And I can't overemphasize that, is that we need to pay attention to our youth, and because at the end of the day, those youth are going to be coming back and taking care of us. So I want to thank you very much for having the opportunity to share some of my most deepest feelings and ideologies and to participate in this amazing speaking series.
Thank you for that. I'm going to pass it over to Charlie to see if he can one-up his father, but I don't think he's going to be able to. That was very powerful and moving.
Yeah, the story of my life, trying to step out of the shadow of my pop, but I wouldn't like it any other way. I think I pay tribute to everything that him and my mom have done, as well as the rest of my family and community. I think that you guys got a sneak peek of where I get it from. And so, yeah, thanks again, Beth, too, for showing up with us. I think it was a beautiful talk series today. I think it had a very good balance, an eloquent balance of academia's role as well as the local role in, trying to make this world a better place. So if you would like to give thanks or shout outs, or where can we get one of those shirts maybe?
Yeah, we'd be happy to send you a shirt from the department. Just let us know. It's celebrating the 50th anniversary and the legacy of Native American studies and the founders, Dave Risling Jr., Jack Forbes, Sarah Hutchinson, Carl Gorman, and others. And I just want to express my gratitude, being able to share this space with Charlie and Ron, with father and son, to listen to your dialogue, to listen to you, Ron, and to be here with you, Virgil, and all your good work has been just really inspiring and an honor. So thank you.
Thank you. We will be back at it on Monday with Terry Cross. That will be Monday at 2:00. I want to thank everybody that has tuned in and made comments. We've been reading them and questions. We didn't get to it, but thank you for tuning in, and have a good weekend, and maybe get outside a little bit.
Just a little bit.
All right. Yotwa.
Take care. Thank you.